Good evening, everyone. My name is Buki Akwata. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I am the VP of Administration for National Black MBA Twin Cities Chapter. We're so glad you could make it tonight. A very short agenda for tonight. I will start with information about the National Black MBA Association, thank our members and sponsors, and then I will hand over to Marielle Storms, who is our VP of Operations and also the moderator for tonight's event. Marielle will lead the panel discussion, and then she will hand over to Karine Anyoam, who is our co-director of corporate relations, and she is going to lead the Q&A session and then pass it back over to Marielle for the event wrap-up. National Black MBA Association, who are we? We are a premier national organization that supports Black professionals. We focus on education, wealth building, career opportunities, and community. We are a 50-year-old organization, and we have 40 chapters nationwide at this time. So 50th year, this year we're supposed to have our annual conference in DC, but thanks to COVID, we had to go virtual, but it was still a very successful conference as we had over 9,000 participants. And if you were one of those participants, thank you so much for attending. Twin Cities chapter, currently we have over 300 members. And I should also mention that even though our name includes MBA, we are not only a group of MBA holders. We have about 54% of our members right now with MBA degrees, but we have other members with undergrad degrees, other master's degrees, and PhDs. So specifically about our chapter, what do? We have a bunch of programming year-round. We had a series of professional development fireside chats. They were centered around how to market your brand, how to connect intentionally, and how to have meaningful conversations. We also focus on education. We have a Leaders of Tomorrow program that's a mentorship program for high school students. We hold financial education events. We have career events. Earlier this year, we had a virtual career that was very successful. And just last month, we had a career event that was centered around careers that are still thriving in retail at this point. We have networking mixes, obviously not in the last few months. We've not been able to do anything in person recently. And we also focus on community. As we all know, back in May of this year, sadly, Mr. George Floyd was killed. In the aftermath of that, we made a donation to the local chapter of NAACP to help in their fight for civil rights. We also made a donation to the Minnesota chapter of the Black Chamber of Commerce to help businesses that were affected in the riots that happened. Recently, we also partnered with SN Number. This is a professional organization of Asian business professionals. We partner with them to deliver meals to a hospital just to, show some appreciation to healthcare workers for putting their lives on the line every day for us. And tonight we're having this very important conversation about Black mental health. It is very much needed, especially now in the aftermath of the elections and Thanksgiving coming up. That should be very interesting for a lot of families. And after this event, we have a member appreciation event that's currently in the planning stages, and we will share that information soon. So thank you so much to our sponsors. Here is our current chapter sponsors. We really appreciate you. Thank you for all you do. We would not be able to do what we do without your support. And also, I'd like to say a big thank you to our members. Thank you so much. If you were previously a member and would like to renew, or you're not a member right now, but you're interested in finding out more, please go to nbmba.org to find more information on how to join. And funny enough, there are a bunch of scholarship opportunities that are available right now to members. Some of them expire at the end of this month. So if you're interested, please go to nbmba.org/scholarship to find out more information. And you can also contact us on the chapter level at nbmbaa-twincities.org, or you can send us an email at membership@nbmbaa-twincities.org. And we are always looking for friends. So please connect with us on social media. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. At this time, I will hand over to Marielle to begin the panel discussion session. Thank you for joining us. Marielle?
Thank you, Buki, for that introduction. And I'm so excited for this event and just hearing all of our panelists answer some very key questions around mental well-being, especially for people of color. But let's kick it off with just getting to know our panelists first and foremost. And I'm not sure who's up. Oh, Ade Dokun. Dr. Ade Dokun, will you please just tell us a little bit about yourself, your practice, and what you do for a living?
Yes, I first of all want to thank you all for having me. It's an honor to be here tonight. So I'm Dr. Elizabeth Ade Dokun. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I have been practicing psychotherapy for over 6 years now. I received my master's at Northwestern University and recently received my doctorate in marriage and family therapy from Drexel University. Currently, I am in private practice. I work with a wide array of people, from individuals, couples, and families. My specialization lies in adolescents who struggle with depression and anxiety. And recently, I've been trained in what is called perinatal mental health for new mothers, first-time mothers, or seasoned mothers. And I work with families who struggle with postpartum depression and anxiety. I've also have a couple of publications out. If you just Google Scholar Me, I have done research with adolescents who have severe suicidal ideation and depression. And my study has found that a secure attachment is pretty important for developing more healthy patterns for dealing with mental health. So that's me. I'm married and I have 2 kids. And again, I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I know that we'll dive into those questions because I think we have some statistics around adolescents, in particular adolescents of color. Next, I would love to introduce Dr. Tyson Roberts. Same question. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm certainly honored to be here as well. I thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Jan Tyson Roberts. I am a clinical psychologist. I received my training at Fordham University in New York City and returned home I'm born and raised in Minneapolis, returned home in 2005, where I finished my postdoctoral studies and began working at what is now Hennepin Healthcare. So I worked in the, I'm blocking. I worked in the primary care behavioral health in medicine clinic, offering services to clients who were seeing their medical doctors. They would refer them to us if there were any mental health concerns. And then I moved on to the adult psychiatry clinic where I saw individuals and individual and group therapy. About 2013, I began a private practice and left the hospital in 2017. I'm solely in independent practice currently, where I see individuals for therapy. I also do pre-employment assessments for public safety applicants. So that's me in a nutshell. I am also married. I have one first grader. And again, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Tyson Roberts. And I know that you have a great question coming up too, talking about the holidays. And then finally, we have Dr. Awushika. Dr. Awushika, final question, but of course, your personal spin. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for a living.
Well, thanks for having me as well. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. So my name is Kyle Awushika, and Maria, I must say you nailed it. So I'm originally from Nigeria, and I trained in uh, Nigeria, South Africa, as well as in here in the States. I uh, finished my undergraduate studies in Nigeria and moved over to the US to start my psychiatry training at the Harlem Hospital Center in New York City. Um, I was just a hop on a skip from Fordham University, just across the river from Fordham. Uh, so I trained in New York and ultimately moved here in 2004, and I've been in Minnesota since then. I practice, well, let me put it this way. I have practiced in different settings over time. Currently in full-time private practice. Up until September of this year, I was doing both inpatient and outpatient work. But right now I'm in full-time practice. I have my own private practice, which has been in existence since 2012. And I have a special interest in mood disorders and kind of use different modalities to treat mood disorders. Um, I work with therapists in my office, and we also use medications and other interventional strategies to deal with mood disorders. Things like transcranial magnetic stimulation, ketamine, and other modalities of treatment. So I'm married as well, have two wonderful children, and I am very happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Well, let's dive in. First and foremost, we have got to have a baseline of what is good mental health. And this goes out to any of the panelists and all of them, if you want. What's your definition of good mental health or mental well-being?
Ladies first.
Well, I would say, yes, my microphone is on. I would say that good mental health is the ability to, it's not the ability to do away or not experience hard things. Hard things happen anyway. And so it's our ability to manage hard things and get through it on the other side. So we all, particularly now in COVID times, we all have experienced really difficult challenges with having to separate ourselves from our loved ones, with having to, protect ourselves, wear masks all the time. All those things are really hard. I would again say that good mental health is being able to do those hard things and come out on the other side of it.
Yes, I would also agree. I believe my definition of mental health really lies in just having a healthy internal well-being and really being able to show self-compassion, similar to what Dr. Jan said. We all face battles, we all face hard times, but the way we take care of ourselves in the midst of that, I believe, kind of how I would define mental health, how we take care of our emotions, how we manage those emotions when we are faced with challenges. So.
Yeah, I certainly agree with my fellow panelists. And I think when we talk about good mental health, for me, I think um, it has to do with each and every one of us ability to, adapt to what we find in our environment, what we're exposed to, because we are a product of both nature and nurture, and um, whatever our experiences are molded by the things that we have been We have learned over time from our parents, our environment, our teachers, and also our own personal experiences. And it goes to talking about resilience and things like that, how we develop those things that help us to cope and become who we all are. So we can all experience the same stressors and come out looking very different. Just depends on how each person learns, how each person feels, how each person has support, relationship, and all that good stuff that we all want to have. And being able to have all those things working for us and developing us to who we are is what I think is a composite of good mental health.
This is great. And I hope everyone is taking notes. I certainly am, because I know the holidays are coming up. So I'm just writing that down: adapt, resilience. But there's a couple other definitions that pop up. And Dr. Adedokun, we're going to start with you on this one. When we talk about mental wellness and even mental illness, we hear words like depression, anxiety, stress, psychological disorders. What do these mean? Maybe we don't understand what those definitions mean. Could you help us with that? And anybody else on the panel can chime in too.
Sure. Thanks for that question. I believe, there's definitely stigma around depression and anxiety. Hearing those disorders tend to just strike a chord with some people and think like, I'm not depressed, I'm not anxious. But in reality, all of us feel sadness, right? We all feel hopeless sometimes when certain, negative situations happen. So instead of using the word like depression, I'm really just focusing on the symptoms of depression. Symptoms of depression are hopelessness, helplessness, indecisiveness. A lot of these things that we have all felt as human beings at some time in our lives. I'm glad that you brought up the term mental illness. I think a lot of people, again, have this stigma that like something is wrong, something is, out of order. But illness, if you think about illness, you think about diabetes, high blood pressure, cancer. And so a mental illness is, kind of like a softer way of talking about your emotions when you're not able to manage those when you're faced with difficult times. So I hope that answers the question.
Dr. Oshika, would you like to chime in, or Dr. Tyson Roberts?
A lot of people are very squeamish when it comes to talking about mental health or mental illness. And in the community at large, we tend to use terminology like stress to kind of put everything in the same boat. So when you talk about stress, you could be referring to, just somebody who had a minor issue at work or conflict at work or stuff like that. And you can also be talking about somebody who is dealing with a mental health breakdown. In the past, we'll talk about nervous breakdown. But when we talk about mental illnesses, talk about major depressive disorder, talk about bipolar disorder, talk about, the effects of personality disorders like borderline personality disorder, and all these conditions that are really impactful when it comes to relationship with family, with the workplace, and with the community at large. Stress is just a term that kind of encompasses all this different conditions and kind of puts like Elizabeth said, that kind of puts a calmer kind of tone on mental illness, so it's a little more accepted. It's like you're talking about diabetes, you're talking about all these other conditions, because the public has heard about these different conditions so often, and they know somebody who has these conditions, they have been accepted. But we don't have that situation with mental illness. So to say that somebody has bipolar disorder, it connotes something very different when it is heard in the public. So stress is one of those terms that has been used over time to describe mental illness, mental health conditions, so to speak.
I also want to piggyback off what Dr. Edidokun said. Everybody feels sad or down or depressed at any given time. Every one of us here probably has felt that way at some point. When, however, those symptoms of feeling sad, down, depressed last longer than 2 weeks, more days than not, then we start to believe it's a mental health condition or a diagnosis, if you will. And everybody has felt nervous, anxious, on edge. Those are also normal feelings. Anxiety, those nervous feelings are meant to protect you. If you're in the middle of Hennepin Avenue and a car comes, barreling towards you, you better feel those things and get the heck out of the way. If those feelings persist, feeling nervous, anxious, on edge, heart racing, and numbness and tingling in your extremities, but there's no real danger, there's no woolly mammoth, as they say, to come who's charging after you, that's when we think, and it's lasting for as long as 2 weeks, that's when we think that there may be a mental health disorder. So all those feelings are normal in regular contexts. If they last longer than 2 weeks, then we start to think that there is a mental health disorder.
That's great. Excellent answers and insights. And I love how you said, this is normal. This is when you need to seek help, because that is one of the things we wanted to touch on. But Dr. Tyson Roberts, stay right there, because this next question is for you. And I'll just read it here. Surprise, surprise, 2020 is a year like no other and has been causing strain on all of us and our mental well-being. We have COVID-19 that's sweeping the world and new death tolls every single day. We have lockdowns. We just heard from the governor just a few days ago of even further restrictions. We have continual racial inequalities captured on video, being streamed over and over again. We're seeing people dying without cause. And also we have joblessness, a lot of unemployed. So that is a whole other stress, not having a job. I know that for sure. And then to just compound things even more, we have a very difficult election year. In fact, the election seems to be dragging on even longer. The list just does not stop for 2020. So tell us, what are some strategies that you would recommend to help us decrease these feelings of hopelessness, anxiety, and stress, in particular for the Black community?
Well, thank you for that question. I get that a lot. I'm sure we all do. It's just very challenging times for many of us. And because they are challenging times, it's really important for all of us to double down on those things that make us feel better, those things that you can do to provide self-care. Now, self-care is not just, I think I'll go get my favorite latte at Starbucks today. That's great, but that's not self-care. That's not what I'm talking about. Self-care is also being a mother of a small child. It's not going to Target by myself. Woohoo! That's not self-care either. What is self-care are doing those things where you can extricate yourself from whatever stressful situation and really do things to take care of yourself. Now, I have several points that I often turn to in doing that. One of them, this comes from my friend, Dr. Reba Peoples. She's a psychiatrist who was previously here and she's moved away, but she talks about tailoring your inputs. Tailoring your inputs. What are you putting in your body? That could mean food. Are you eating properly? Are you eating a steady diet of Cheetos and soda? That's probably not going to do very well in taking care of yourself. You've got to fuel your body with whole foods, natural foods. How are you managing your moods? Are your moods just all over the place? Do you possibly need some help or to extricate yourself in dealing with that? What we know is that anxiety, depression, those are mind-body disorders, if you will. And because they are mind-body experiences, it's important to use mind-body interventions to address them. And so I'm sure we can talk about that later as well. But continuing on with tailoring your inputs, sleep, really, really important that you are getting the proper sleep, that you're not taking your cell phone with you. I noticed at one point I was waking up, the first thing I did was reach for my cell phone. And then I start, scrolling through all the negativity. And I was like, why am I, that does not help me. That is not helpful. And so just being careful about what is in your space, being sure to get your movement, whether you exercise by run, doesn't mean you got to run a marathon. It does mean you should move your body at some point, some kind of way. And the last one I'll say is being really, really mindful of your social support. Maintaining social support and social connections are really, really important. And of course, with the governor saying, oh, only 10 people can get together at a time and you can't go to bars and you can't go, being really mindful of how you, A, who your social supports, but B, how you continue to foster those social supports. Some friends of mine and we get together every month or so and do a happy hour, a virtual happy hour. And we go, girl, what you drinking? Or what are you doing? And that's how we stay connected. And it's really important for all of us to do those things. So yes, self-care, take care of yourself, but also pay attention to what are you putting in your body? Do you have a daily diet of negative Facebook? Then maybe you should look at what you're consuming. Get your sleep, manage your moods, move your body, and maintain those social supports that are going to be really important for you.
That was excellent, Dr. Tyson Roberts. I was writing down a lot of notes and I kept on thinking, a lot of us, we do that therapy, or is it shopping therapy? Is that what it's called? And then we get
therapy.
Retail therapy. Thank you.
I'm familiar.
And then we get done and then we're just as depressed and anxious as well. And so I loved that point of, really thinking scientifically, like I need to make sure I'm eating healthy. That ice cream at the end of the day tastes good, doesn't change my mood for the long run. Whereas maybe a whole grain where I feel better about myself, like I did something good, or exercising for 30 minutes, I did something good for myself. And therefore I'm taking care of myself. I feel good about myself. One thing I forgot to mention, by the way, at the very beginning is to all of us, or to all the attendees, there's a chat down below and also a Q&A. So if you have any questions for the panelists, type in those questions and Karine will be checking those and she will bring those up at the end of our panel discussion. So again, at the bottom, the chat and the Q&A, we'll get to those questions for our panelists later on. Wonderful. So moving on, and actually this might be directed to Dr. Ade Dokun, because you mentioned this with helping support teens and adolescents. Now I found this, this report, according to the US Department of Health and Human Services Office. They actually have a special section on minority health. And a study was done not long ago that showed African American adults are 20% more likely to report psychological distress than their white counterparts. However, African American adults were less likely than whites to seek treatment and more likely to end prematurely. The question is why? Do you believe that it could be the stigma behind asking for help? Maybe it's the belief that mental illness will go away. I'll just pray about it and it'll go away. Or even more so, barriers to treatment. How do they find a doctor? Where do they find a doctor? Is there a doctor that I feel comfortable talking with even? Is it all of the above? Is there something else? Maybe I'll just start with you, Dr. Ade Dokun, and then open it up to the other panelists.
Sure, yes. Thank you for that question. You know, back in 2015, I actually published an article on the importance of seeking mental health as an African American, and I partnered with a mega church in Philadelphia. And it's very true. Yes, a lot of African Americans rather rely on, you know, religious activities, praying or going to church. Of course, I think it's a mix of a lot of the things that you said, the stigma, the you know lack of resources. I know one thing I'm noticing, and I'm not sure if Dr. Owosika or Dr. Jan noticed this, but there is really a lack of providers of color. I've noticed in this state, Minnesota. There, at least in my field, in marriage and family therapy, there's less than 2% of licensed marriage and family therapists who identify as African American. And that can be pretty discouraging when someone is wanting a provider of color or wanting a provider that looks like them and that they can relate to. A lot of the African American providers here either have a long wait list or are not accepting new clients. So that can really be discouraging, right? So it's you know it's I think a lot of it is you know the stigma, the lack of resources, but I definitely wanted to bring you know that up with the low statistics of licensed African American providers here. I think that definitely plays a role in you know African Americans being less likely to seek mental health.
Thank you so much. Dr. Tyson Roberts or Dr. Awushika, any comments or?
I tend to agree that the stigma is huge. And it's also very interesting that the experience is also very different when we talk about Black and African Americans. The experience is very different between African Americans that grew up in the United States and immigrants. There is a huge divide in how these different groups seek care. Um, there's what they all have in common is the religious background and the impact of the different faith-based organizations. But when it comes to seeking care, African American or Black women seek care more than African American men in any of these different populations. There is a huge stigma associated with mental illness or mental health care in general. You don't even have to have mental illness in particular. Mental health care, you're just talking about therapy. You know, there's this feeling that you are weak if you're seeking therapy or you're seeking care. I mean, I don't think a lot of men have been allowed or given the opportunity to express themselves or feel that it is okay for a guy to cry or a guy to express how they feel, you know. And so getting care, there's no one they're talking to. I mean, everybody's macho. Everybody is always good, you know. There's a book I just came across with that title, "Yeah, man, I'm good," you know, and that's how it is. And African American men in particular just feel that there's no need for them to be talking to a therapist. That doesn't work. That's not for me. That's not for. I mean, I don't have any brother who is talking to a therapist. You don't know that because nobody's telling you that they're seeing a therapist, you know. And sometimes we don't like what we hear, and so we don't seek out that help because we don't want to hear the truth. We want to hear what we know or what our friends have told us. So we don't want to get the professional help too. And the same thing goes to the youths, where suicide was not very common in the African American population until we started looking at numbers from 2018 when they compared to 2008. And there's a 50% increase in the number of suicides, completed suicide and suicide attempts in African American youths and African Americans in general, which is not something that used to be the case. You know, the disparity between the numbers of people that attempted when we compare to the white population, it used to be a big gulf, but that's not the case anymore. And it's a result of what we're talking about tonight, not seeking help or not feeling comfortable enough to seek help. So stigma, stigma, stigma.
And to add on to that, I think it's really important for us to normalize help-seeking behavior, so that it's not so hush-hush, so secretive, but to let people know if you're seeking therapy, there's no shame in it at all. What's shameful in getting help for something? You're not ashamed to go see the doctor. If you have diabetes, why should you be ashamed to go seek out mental health treatment? In addition, it's also important to for us I guess I'm talking about us in the profession, to push proper training for people who maybe haven't had the opportunity to work with people of African or Latinx descent. You know, we have gone to the same training that our white counterparts have, but some of us have sought out additional training to make sure that we are culturally competent in all the work that we do. So that's also important for us to recognize.
Thank you all. And just for the attendees, we actually will have a document at the end with resources. If you are seeking or wanting to seek help, we'll have those resources for you to reach out. We're here for you. We want to make sure that you have good well-being. So those resources will be available. And actually, I just want to tag along to Dr. Tyson Roberts, as far as like, we seek help when we want to lose weight. We go and find a physical trainer for our well-being. Can't we find someone to do the same thing for our mental well-being? Mm-hmm. You know, it's a whole body here, whole body experience. So thank you all. Dr. Awushika, this next question is for you, because we were talking about stigmas. So now we're going into the actual medication. There's a lot of stigma and fear around using antidepressants and psychiatric medications to help us deal with mental health issues. What advice would you give to help reduce or erase that stigma when taking prescribed medication or even seeking help in general?
Well, one of the foundations of this fear is the general mistrust of medicine when it comes to Blacks and African Americans in general. There's a history there, and we cannot ignore that. And you know, a lot of information in our communities, information that have been passed down, verbal communication from one generation to the next. So there is a general mistrust of medicine in general in our communities. Over time, like I said earlier, there has been acceptance of the physical health conditions, because we're dying if we don't take care of those things. We have high blood pressure, we have diabetes, we have asthma, we have all these conditions that are very preponderant in our community. So it's become accepted to say, okay, I'm taking medication, or I'm giving myself injection to treat my diabetes, or I have an inhaler to treat my asthma, or because I have high blood pressure, I'm taking medication. But when it comes to mental health, I mean, conditions that you can't see and nobody really knows that you have it except if it's manifested. There's that same whole deal with, you know, with fear that, oh, I'm taking medications, oh, it's a crutch. The medication is going to change the way I feel. It's going to make me into somebody I'm not. And then the media does not help when we talk about, oh, he's going schizo, oh, he's a bipolar patient, you know. And so the things that we see, the things that we hear kind of make us be afraid that, okay, if I take this medication, it's going to change my personality. So a lot of the fear comes from what we have heard, what we have seen, and our experience in the community. So they say, oh, they saw somebody who was acting strange in the park and the police tackled them. You know, all these things make people afraid that, okay, if I tell anybody I'm taking an antidepressant, they'll start looking at me differently. And the perception at my workplace may be different. Maybe somebody's going to test me and find that I'm using medications. You know, there are all sorts of misconceptions about medication. So one of the key things that I would like to tell folks is that, you know, before you go to see a provider or psychiatrist or a psychiatric provider, make sure you do your own homework, because you already know some of the things that the symptoms that you're dealing with. You have questions, ask questions. You know, don't be intimidated by anyone you're going to see. They are working for you. You know, we're here to serve you. You know, so be willing to ask those questions. And the best patients I have are the ones that engage me, that ask me questions. So I know where they're coming from, and I know, you know, how to help them. It's unfortunate that it's come to a time where folks just want to write you a prescription and you're out the door. But you can insist on saying, I'm not going to take this medication until you tell me what the side effects are and what is the percentage of people that have this side effect. Of, you know, you can ask those questions. Your physician should tell you what the chances of you developing one side effect or the other is, and then be willing to come back and give them a feedback as to what your experience is. So trying to get over that initial mistrust of medicine, and then learning about mental illness as a whole, and then you being willing to ask the necessary questions when you go into your provider's face, that you don't feel intimidated by the person. You know, one of the things I learned from my dad when he used to go see, my dad was diabetic and he had glaucoma, and he used to challenge his doctors, and he will ask questions. He will have questions that he had written before he went into appointments. And some of them found it irritating because he just wanted to tell him what they wanted to do and move on. But he would not accept that you telling him. He will want you to answer his own questions so that he feels comfortable with whatever side effects or whatever he experiences. And that's how we should all be, that we see our providers as collaborating with us in our own care, and that we are able to ask those questions. Nobody should feel intimidated by any physician or any provider, regardless of what their color is, and should be willing to challenge them if you have something that is happening that you did not expect or they did not explain to you. I'll stop there.
I love it. I literally wrote this down. Here to serve you. It's a collaboration. Bring your question. Your dad is a very wise and wonderful man, because I don't even do that. I just go in going, find out what's wrong with me. Tell me. But being prepared as if it's like you're working on a project. The project is you and your well-being. They're here to serve you. Talking about the side effects, don't be ashamed to say this. Something is happening. I don't like it. I love that. Excellent, excellent advice. Now, Dr. Adedokun, the next question is for you, and this is dealing with the holidays coming up. I know you're shaking your head. I'm definitely going to write down some notes for this one because, you know, with the holidays coming up during the pandemic, the election year is amidst us. So how would you recommend handling family members with opposing political views? Maybe they don't think masks are appropriate. They want you to gather in large groups. Hey, this is family tradition. You got to make grandma happy. I don't know. I'm just thinking, and you're just like, I don't want to get grandma sick. Help us, give us some recommendations on how to deal with the holidays, political views, and maybe some tips to make changes to holiday traditions.
Sure, yes, thank you for this question. I think I even saw a similar question in the chat. You know, I think first things first is really just focusing on the goal of holidays. Why do we get together for holidays? We get together for holidays to enjoy each other's presence, laugh, eat good food, you know, reflect, go around the table and say, you know, 1 to 2 things you're thankful for. I believe there's a time and place for everything. And the family dinner table is probably not the most appropriate place to, you know, talk about things like politics or the election, especially, you know, thinking of those topics that may damper someone's mood, right? Because the goal of holidays is to just be joyful. So I think it's appropriate to be selective in your family conversation, but that really starts with making a clear boundary, if possible, before you meet with your family or gather with your family. Making a boundary and maintaining that boundary. Come up with a list of what are some off-topic, you know, subjects that we're just going to leave on the off-topic list. I know when I work with my families in the beginning of the session, we collaborate and make family rules, family limits. What are we going to talk about? What are we not going to talk about? I think that's appropriate to prepare for the holidays. And again, focusing on that goal of, you know, enjoying each other's presence. And I think another thing, if you know, happen to have a family member who's extremely vocal and, you know, they just really have to just get their opinion out there, I think it's okay to validate them, right? You know, if they're feeling annoyed or angry, oh, I hear that you're angry. I'm sure we've all felt angry this year, but, you know, I really don't want to talk about that right now. I think I want to know what's going on with you. What's new in your life? You know, validating them. Don't get caught up in the facts, the statistics. Don't get caught up in the persuasion and different opinions. Validate how they feel and gently just switch the subject. I think that's really appropriate. And lastly, just bringing some kind of distraction, right? Like a family game or, you know, an old family video. I know a lot of people unfortunately have lost loved ones due to COVID. And so reflecting on the good things that you remember of those loved ones, right? You know, just enjoying each other's company, enjoying, you know, what are you looking forward to, you know, reflecting. I think that's a really important aspect. But overall, creating and maintaining your boundaries, validating, don't get caught up in the facts or the statistics of what's going on. Focus on the goal of enjoying each other. Life is short. There's a time and place to talk about politics, not at the dinner table.
It's funny. I'm just going to do a plug for one of my podcasts, Hidden Brains with Shankar Vedan. The podcast literally says, not at the dinner table. And it talks about avoiding politics at the dinner table.
Right.
You're absolutely right. And I'm writing down, I love the fact that like it's taking some anger, frustration about the election or the pandemic. I'm not going to be able to have that big turkey dinner. And switching it to something happy. I'm thinking like a Zoom call with my family and like swapping some old photos of my aunts and uncles with their bell-bottom jeans and their fros. I'm looking forward to, I'm going to make that suggestion because that's going to be fun. So some of those photos I have are golden. And I think that will change the subject right away. You know, as soon as they bring up politics, I'm like, don't make me bring up that photo of you in high school. Yeah, I got that. Anyway, so we're running low on time. I got the little bell from Karine. It sounds like we have a lot of questions. So we're going to skip to the very last question. This goes to all of the panelists and Dr. Tyson Roberts. We'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about the free resources that you would suggest to help us maintain a positive mental well-being, or even if we have a family or a family member or friend that needs a little boost, what can we give them? How can we help them?
Let's see. There are a lot of, on the real basic level, there are a lot of free apps that people can download. I recommend people using the Calm app. There's Insight Timer. All these things can kind of help you just take a few minutes and maybe go through a guided meditation to relax yourself. There's also, I think there's Sleep. I think that's on Calm app too. If you have trouble sleeping, just put this little app on and it will play some soothing music and help you get to sleep. So those are some really easy, free things that people can avail themselves of. Also, and this is not my area, so I don't want to step outside, but I know, there are some free resources. If you have Minnesota Care for your health insurance, you can be seen. There are parity laws that it's required that you can see a mental health professional and not have to pay any more than you would have to pay to see a medical professional. That's the law. Yeah, I was going to say something else, but I won't go there. That's the law. So you can, when people say, oh, I don't have insurance, get insurance, sign up for Minnesota Care, and you can have access to the mental health or the behavioral health that you need. Yeah, those are my two.
And Dr. Awushika, what resources or tips do you have to help us seek out mental wellness and have mental wealth in the long run?
Thank you for the question. So one of the organizations I support that provides a whole lot of resources for mental illness is the National Alliance for Mental Illness. That's NAMI. So if folks can go to nami.org, there are specific resources for Blacks and African Americans in particular. So there are at least, if I am not undercutting, there's at least 20 different links for different resources that folks can click on, including grants and scholarships for even specifically for African American women for therapy, that people can access. So that's one-stop shop that folks can go to get resources. And also, I mean, if you go to SAMHSA, that's the federal government resource, you can find, you can use that to search for therapy, therapists and psychiatric providers. There are several different resources out there. Then there specifically for African Americans, I mean, there's also the mentalhealthnational.org. That's another one that also addresses African American concerns and also has a lot of resources. So those would be tools that folks can use. I mean, in their own time, can in the privacy of their home, search out what they'll be comfortable with. And then there, like Dr. Tyson Roberts said, there are applications that you can use on your phone. There's one particular one I like it's actually from Canada. It's actually free from Canada. I used to consult in Canada, and it's called Mindshift. So you can download that app. It's specific for anxiety. So folks that have anxiety disorders can actually use that tool to help themselves. It's based on cognitive behavioral therapy, and it helps a lot if you one who does not want to, engage a provider, but you need help. That would be another resource that I think folks can. And also, we're not saying that faith-based organizations are terrible. That's not the reality. The reality is, there are, even when it comes to anxiety, faith-based organizations do a very good job with managing anxiety, especially once they're balanced in their views and can help folks and at least listen to them. Some folks just need someone who will listen. It's not always that there has to be something done. You need someone to unburden yourself with, and that's where the faith-based organizations do a very good job. So if you're one who has a faith that you're particular about, you certainly can follow that. Thank you.
Thank you. And to top us off, Dr. Adedokun, what resources would you recommend for any of us that are seeking just to have a better mental health well-being, bank that mental wealth and just be overall better in the long run?
Sure, yes. Buki actually brought up what I was going to talk about. Psychology Today is one of my favorites. I get a majority of my referrals through Psychology Today and Therapy for Black Girls. One reason I like those two resources is that not only you're able, to find a therapist that best meet your needs, but there are very helpful self-help or self-care articles that one can read, to help with your emotions or mental health. There's also podcasts that people can just have playing, in the background. So that's pretty helpful. And there is a therapy for Black men too, which is new to me. I didn't know that, which I think is amazing that there's a resource specifically for Black men. But Psychology Today and Therapy for Black Girls and Black Men are pretty good ones because again, you'll find those helpful articles. So.
Thank you. Thank you all panelists. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually hand it over to Karine. And she will be going through the Q&A that all of you attendees have asked. Thank you so much for allowing me to be the moderator. And Karine, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Moriel, and thank you all again for joining us for the discussion on Black mental health. And so what we'll do, I'll start with some of the questions that have been sent via the chat feature, and then I'll transition over to the questions in the Q&A box. So I'll encourage you now, if you haven't yet submitted a question in the Q&A, please go ahead and do so, and so that your question can be addressed. So let's start with the first question here around COVID, and we kind of talked a little bit about that during the discussion, but this specific question is really around how do we get access to providers, more therapists of color to provide online services during this time. I think during the discussion, we heard from the panelists that there is a really small percentage of providers of color. So how do we have them to really have their services become virtual?
I'll just say that most providers that I know are all providing telehealth services right now. With the numbers, the COVID numbers, the way that they're going, it's may not be safe to provide therapy in your office. And some people do that with just enough distancing, but most of the providers that I'm familiar with are providing telehealth services, which makes it really easy to just, click on their link and then you're in their virtual office. So most are providing telehealth services currently.
Thank you, Dr. Tyson Roberts. And I think this next question here in the chat is for you. During your discussion, you talked about the symptoms lasting a little bit around like depression and anxiety more than 2 weeks. And so this question is around why is it not a week or 2 days? Why is it a 2-week time period?
So I'm assuming that's questions for me.
Yeah.
Everybody feels sad or down or depressed, everybody. And most sadnesses last, just a couple of days or a day or two. So you wouldn't necessarily diagnose somebody with depression based on a symptom lasting a couple of days. And so I was not in the room when they, developed the DSM-5, but I imagine that because if it's protracted, if it's a longer period of time, as in 2 weeks, that's when you're more likely to be diagnosed with depression. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you. And this question, we touched on it a little bit early on, but I don't know if there's any other suggestions around how we can deal with holiday grief in the pandemic.
I can take a stab. Grief is one of those things that we all deal with. If we haven't, then get ready, because we will. But what I try to do with my clients who are experiencing grief is to have them try to find new meaning in the grief. I have a very dear friend of mine who lost her mother, and around Mother's Day every year is when she would go to the garden store, buy all her flowers, and start, planting all the flowers in her yard, because that's what her mother would do. And so that became, she was able to kind of reframe what Mother's Day meant for her. And so I would encourage the same thing with regard to the holidays. If you have a certain thing that you would do around the holidays with that was meaningful to you and that person, I would just make new meaning of it, and kind of reframe it for yourself so that maybe it's not as sad. Maybe you can remember some happy times when you are doing those things. So do a lot of reframing and make different meanings of your grief.
Thank you. That's a great suggestion. The holidays coming up. This next question is for Dr. Woshika. So during your talk, you talked about how we often group everything under stress. So this question is really addressing, how do you know you're not just stressed and you need to seek help?
I think Dr. Tyson Roberts already alluded to the 2-week period. So a lot of the psychiatric diagnoses give room for variations of normal to occur. So at least say, for instance, that someone who, is, you have a friend who you say always happy, or somebody who is melancholic, so there's that room for normal behavior, and then anything that seems to persist outside of what is considered normal, that's in that 2-week period, or when you have an accumulation of different symptoms, not just a particular mood, but when other things now fall in place. We've been talking about depression, for instance. So sadness is one thing, but when you start finding that you don't enjoy things any longer, the things that were pleasurable to you before, they're no longer pleasurable. You'll find that there's a change in your sleep pattern. You're finding that your appetite, maybe you're eating too much or eating less, you're losing weight, and all these other things come into play in that at the same time. Now you're forming a symptom complex that is enough to make a diagnosis of a condition, as against you just having, a foul mood, or you just feeling irritated by something at work or someone in your life. So those are the things that kind of differentiate, making a diagnosis of a mental health condition as against, a normal variation.
Thank you. So there's another question here around how do we know if our mental health issue is psychological or medical? Do we start with a psychologist and have them recommend a psychiatrist? This person really wants to understand the process.
Well, I think that's the way it typically goes. One reason why that happens is because of access. One reason is because, psychiatrists, not because they don't want to see folks, but because at the time there was a shortage of psychiatrists in the US, just because when you compared it to specialties like dermatology, radiology, anesthesiology, or ophthalmology, they were not as financially rewarding when you go through the rolling process of 5 years of residency as in any other specialty. So people did not want to go into psychiatry. So there was a shortage of psychiatrists. But over time, psychiatry has become more lucrative. So there are more people now interested in psychiatry because it is giving a lot of people the kind of lifestyle they want, the balance they want. They want a 9-to-5 job. They don't want to spend all their lives in the hospital. And so more people are getting access. So you find that there are more therapy services available in general. So there's a tendency that a primary care physician may start someone on medications and refer them to a therapist before they actually get to see a psychiatrist or a psychiatric provider. So that's typically how the process goes. So the gatekeeper really is your primary care physician, who says, okay, you have this condition, you told me about this, why don't you do this? And then see this person. That's typically how it goes. And there are folks that also go on the internet and search out providers and make appointments directly. Just like Dr. Adedokun said earlier on, that for psychology today, I get a lot of referrals from there as well, people that reach out to you directly and say, they message you and then they want a specific question answered, you know, and they want to know if you are working in this particular field, they want your specific expertise. So people reach out that way as well. So it goes the typical ways through the primary care physician to providers.
Thank you, Dr. Washika. And so one more question we're going to take in the chat, and we're going to move on to the Q&A box here. And this question is for you, Dr. Washika. It's really around, can you address seasonal affective disorder?
Right. So seasonal affective disorder is a form of major depressive disorder. There's a with the DSM, like Dr. Tyson Roberts alluded to earlier on, it is a condition that we find in places like Minnesota where we lose light and we start having symptoms of depression where, you know, you start feeling lethargic, you know, you don't enjoy things like you used to, you just find yourself being tired and, you know, maybe you're finding yourself eating a lot, sleeping too much, you know, whereas normally in the months, the summer months, you're fine. You're not on medication. You don't need anything. But once you have that pattern, that year in, year out, once fall rolls in, that you start feeling these symptoms, then you do have seasonal affective disorder. So when we look at that in the DSM, that's major depressive disorder with seasonal exacerbation will be what it will be called. But it is a form of depression. And it is treatable. It is treatable with improvement in light source. And it's not just the regular light source. There's a specific type of light, so anywhere between 5,000 and 10,000 lumens that produces the light that our eyes absorb and brings about changes in our brain to improve the production of serotonin that improves our mood. These are things that happen naturally, you know, that we don't think about. But once we lose sunlight for, now it's already by 4:30 now, it's dark in Minnesota, you know, and we don't get light until maybe 7:30, you know. So we have very short daylight hours. And so places like Minnesota, Canada, Alaska, these conditions are very, very common. But like I said, very treatable. And also doing the things that are healthy, eating healthy, exercising, doing all those things that get your mind right, very useful for managing seasonal affective disorder. So these light sources, you can get them from durable medical stores, you can get them from your big box stores, but make sure that the lumens, that's the light, the measurement of the light sources, anywhere between 5,000 and 10,000 lumens. You only need to sit before the light source in the morning, about 30 minutes to an hour, depending on the intensity. And you should be fine from anywhere from the end of September through to the beginning of spring.
I can add something to what the good doctor has said. One of the things that can be really, really helpful for people of color is to take a vitamin D supplement.
Mm-hmm.
Because of our beautiful melanated skin, that doesn't always allow vitamin D from the sun to, it doesn't allow us as much as we might need. And so there are, so people of color might need a little bit extra boost, a little bit of an extra boost of vitamin D in order to make up for the fact that we're not getting it from the sun. So that's just an easy, simple thing to do. And you might even want to see your primary care doctor and take a look at your vitamin D levels before you do that. But that's a real simple thing to do that can help us feel better during these dark days to come.
Great, thank you, Dr. Robertson, Dr. Washika. So everyone, if you haven't already started, take your vitamin D supplement because we'll definitely need it in the coming months here for the winter. So I'm going to move over to the Q&A. We have quite a few questions here. So the first one here is on, do statistics reveal that Blacks are not taken as serious when they seek help? And I know Dr. Adeku, you mentioned during your session around kind of the statistics of the kind of the low rates of providers of color. So if you want to take that question.
Sure, yes. Based on research, unfortunately, African Americans, they are more likely to feel invalidated, when they're seeing a doctor or a provider, or, overlooked from providers. And so, of course, that would leave a bad taste in one's mouth and probably feel, just kind of turned away. So that's definitely a factor. I believe it's really important, especially as like practitioners and providers, to be not only culturally competent, but I like the word culturally humble, like cultural humility, excuse me, is very important because, when I kind of talk with my white counterparts about, the fact that, Black people tend to feel overlooked or not understood or invalidated, my white counterparts would report that, well, I'm just nervous. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't really understand like what they're going through. So I think that's where that cultural humility comes in, and really validating them and really learning from them and what their needs are, and allowing Black clients to use their voice and not just listen, but really understand and follow up. I think that's a big thing. A lot of providers may not follow up or may not really understand, but just just being and wanting to learn about where they come from and what they're going through is really important in order to make Black people feel validated and heard. So that's really important. But there's definitely research that African Americans, they tend to not seek out services due to just not feeling understood, and that's where that sad statistic comes in, where there's just a lack of providers of color.
Thank you. So we have to continue to speak up and let our voices be heard. It's very important. And this next question, is really on what if employers are not on board with mental health? For instance, at my work, they talk about the importance of mental health, but they still push for stricter working deadlines. And how do you work with your employer on this?
I think it goes back to, again, using your voice, right? Like, going back to your supervisor and reiterating that, okay, if mental health support is important for us, I'm starting to feel a little stressed or overwhelmed with my work demand. Is there any way I can get support around this? Maybe a lighter demand, or, finishing something, past the deadline. I think it really comes down to using your voice and reiterating the employer's values around mental health. So just having that time to reach out to your supervisor, have a meeting with them, and use your voice. Don't feel like you have to be quiet or you're feeling overwhelmed and you're just suffering in silence. It's really important to speak up.
Plus, I don't think the employer would want to be in the news about not supporting mental health care. Especially in the world that we live in now. So there are laws that protect individuals in the workplace that we have to be aware of. And folks have to know that they do have rights when it comes to mental health care or taking time off. There's FMLA, there's available work more than 12 months at a job that should protect you. But so you also have to, when you're signing up for a job, you have to figure out what the terms of your job are, and if the federal laws should apply to every job, so you want to make sure that the company that you work for is not a shady company, that is not doing things just under the table and not meeting the national standards. So if you're, having a mental breakdown or you need some time off work, you should be able to tell your provider that this is what's going on. I'm overly stressed out. I cannot think at my job. I love my job. I don't want to lose it. So there are things that can be done to protect your job, that your provider can say, okay, you need to take maybe this number of days off your job so at least you can recuperate, or take the time to seek out help, or get the care that you need so that you can get back to that job. So we all have to know that these things are available and that we can advocate for ourselves and, get the time off, or, speak up about our needs to our different supervisors or employers.
Thank you, Dr. Wishika. So many nuggets. What you said, that we have to advocate for ourselves. And Dr. Adedeku, thank you for that as well. And we need to speak up, communicate with your provider if you're seeing one as well. And it's okay to take a mental health break and take a day off. Let's move on to the next question. Here it says, what if you don't have a personal support system? How would you suggest a Black woman in particular find and build new positive relationships with like-minded people? This is not a case where one has not taken chances and hasn't exposed himself to new experiences, but what if you explore yourself differently online, but you can't find people that are interested in making friends? So how do they create that personal support system, I think, is the key in this question.
I think that can be really challenging, particularly now in these COVID times where we're all, or most of us anyway, working from home, and it's hard to get out and meet people. A lot of the clients that I'm seeing are really struggling. If they don't have that support system, then how do they get that? And the answer is, I guess, multifaceted. It's to reach out in different ways if you can. Maybe you have an interest in knitting, or maybe you have an interest in running. There are all kinds of Black girls who run group, Black girls who bike groups. There's all kinds of different interest groups that you might avail yourself of if you want to meet different people. But yeah, it is especially challenging during these COVID times, but you just have to work extra hard to kind of put yourself out there and find an interest of yours and see who else might be interested as well.
There are also various support groups as well that are via Zoom. So like if someone does have COVID anxiety, I think that's a positive thing that COVID has brought upon us, is the creativity of, doing virtual support groups via Zoom. I know I refer a lot of my clients to support groups based on, their needs. So I would definitely encourage, again, looking at Psychology Today or Therapy for Black Girls, they definitely have those kind of resources and how to find those support groups.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. We'll definitely like to hear your suggestion.
As well. A lot of time we depend on others because that's what we've always known. We have always had the support around us, but we live in different times now that sometimes we have to also learn to rely on ourselves. There are things that people never knew that they could do, that the situation that we're faced with now has now made it incumbent on each person now to look out onto the inside to what is it I can do for myself. I can't work anymore, I've lost my job. What is it I can do with my hands? So sometimes it might just be looking inwards to find that inner strength and the support that you actually need for yourself to get yourself over this hump that this COVID situation and everything else going on at this time has been path.
Brilliant suggestions. Seek out support groups and interest groups that align to kind of help you through this period. So the next question here is, for Black children under the age of 13, they're twice as likely to die by suicide than white peers. What can the public do to inform ourselves on this issue, or practitioners, to really create tailored interventions or strategies that are culturally relevant for this population?
Yes, I really love this question. I know research has definitely confirmed the rise in African-American suicides. I believe one factor that can be overlooked for some practitioners or providers is the impact of racial trauma. Trauma can be experienced in different ways, especially within the Black community, when we're more likely to be on edge, or our bodies are always in survival mode. That can be very draining and depression and anxiety producing. So I really think that it's important to just share a lot of psychoeducation around racial trauma and how that's impacting Black children's mental health. And also, especially with children less than the age 13, they're still babies, their brains are still developing. So I find that a lot of validation and increasing self-esteem has been also important factors in preventing, the suicidal thoughts. And lastly, really just understanding what they're hopeful for. What is there anything that they look forward to, right? Another factor behind suicide is that there's just no hope. Nothing will get better, right? So I might as well just leave this earth. There's nothing to look forward to. So really just exploring what that looks like specifically for Black children is really important. It's a good question because my dissertation highlighted the rise in African-American suicides and just how racial trauma plays a huge role.
Thank you. And on that note, we have another question on adolescence that Dr. Adetula would like you to address as well. So it says, I have a preteen girl who suffered from anxiety and possibly depression. I took her to a medical counselor and she had a panic attack in the parking lot the day of the appointment, where she cried for 15 minutes in the car before she calmed down enough to go inside the building. She got through the appointment and it went well. However, when she got home, she, said that she never wants to go again. So the question really, should she force the child to go to get medically diagnosed, or should she wait, to get her advice until she's ready? And this person's really asking for help.
Yes, I'm reading the question too. I asked her one. I definitely, of course, would not encourage forcing a child that's actually does more harm than good, especially with preteens. They tend to be a little rebellious. But one thing I think is important is validation, right? Meeting that preteen where she's at and understanding what was going on for her. Not trying to fix it, but really understanding what was going on for her. And that the hope is to lead into why she doesn't want to go again. Did she feel traumatized or triggers? Understanding what's behind her triggers, I think is really important. But should you take her advice? Definitely. I think, preteens want to be heard. They want to be understood. I know they can be rebellious and want their independence and kind of want to do their own thing, but deep down, they really just want to be heard and feel seen and feel like, they matter and that they care. So I definitely agree with taking her advice and, creating communication around what does being ready look like for you so that I can look out for that. And that's showing that, again, you care, you validate, and you're understanding, you're meeting her where she's at. I find that to be really effective when parents want to, which I get. Adolescence is a really hard season to parent, but, not to force, be patient with her, check in with her periodically, and understand what came up for her, and continue to validate her needs and ask, what does being ready look like for you, and how can I support you in that?
I would also keep in mind that we know that anxiety is a mind-body experience. I mentioned that earlier. So even just practicing getting her to relax, getting her to do some deep breathing, which may enable her to start talking about, what, when I was in the car, I started feeling X, and that's why I don't want to go in the building. But just getting her to learn how to relax her body. It's not, what's the word I want? I can't think of the word. It's that may be an easy way just to kind of get your foot in the door in order to help her learn to calm her body so that she might be ready to go and seek help.
Yes, that's a really good point. And when you were speaking, Dr. Jen, I thought of just, some interventions that I use with families. I actually have the parents model that and do that, with their children, because, modeling, there's a lot of power in, parents modeling that desired behavior. So that's a really important point. Thanks for bringing that up.
Thank you both for answering that question, and again, really, like you said, just reiterating, understanding the child's triggers in helping her with meditating and breathing exercises to get her to open up. So this next question is around racism. So as the Black community, continue to stand up to the entrenched racism, what coping strategies can we turn to to ease pain and trauma? Yeah. Dr. Roberts, Dr. Woshika.
This is a big question.
It is. As I mentioned earlier, it is really, and this is whether you're dealing with trauma or not, it's really important to learn how to take care of yourself and understand that there will be people who treat you any kind of way. But that doesn't have to be internalized. And so if you know for yourself that you are managing your moods, you are getting the sleep that you need, you are tailoring your inputs, watching what you take into your body and what's in your space. And in doing all those things, learning to be more resilient so that it's like like water off a duck's back. And I do not mean to minimize the impact of racism at all. But I just think it's important for people to understand that there are things that you can do to help yourself, managing your moods, watch what you put in your body, get your sleep, get your rest, and understand that what happens out there is going to happen. But we need to take care of ourselves in the best way that we can. And those are easy, simple ways to begin to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts. So this question is for Dr. Woshika. Oh, go ahead, sir.
No, I was distracted. The clinical was coming to my office. I'm still at work. So no, I missed the question. Was that about?
Okay. There's a question specifically for you on how do we show up for men in our lives who are not open to seeking out or getting support? So this is a different question.
Okay.
Yes, for men. So we want to talk about the men. How do we show up for them that are not open to seeking out help?
Well,
support them.
I think one of the key things is to first empower them and just let them know that it is not a weakness. That's one of the first things that I think is crucial for men, because the main fear that is universal for people that are afraid to get mental health care is that they're afraid that they'll be emasculated if they seek care, that it makes them look less than who they are, that it makes them feel like they're weak if they're seeking care. So if you have somebody like that in your life and that you want to support, you want to make sure that you yourself, you are doing your best to make sure that you're showing up their emotions and that you're supporting them. And it's not like you're lying to them, but you're looking at the qualities that they have and making them, feel good about themselves before they get the care that they need. Then letting them know that, in this sea of providers out there that all don't look like you, there are still some folks that will understand you. And then some folks out there that, even though they don't look like you, they still understand. It's because it's not everyone out there that is, a racist provider. I have very good colleagues that are non-African American that provide great care, and they're very compassionate individuals that can provide care to anyone, regardless of their color or creed or whatever background they may come from. So just removing that prejudice that it has to also be an African American provider also helps to get the care. Because if we say that, oh, we're only going to go to an African-American therapist or psychiatrist, we're going to wait a long time. If we're talking about 2% of therapists being identifying as African-American, and we have a huge population of people. 16% of this country identifies as having mental illness, African-Americans. We're talking about 44 million people. We're going to wait a long time. So we have to be real and encourage folks that, you know what, you may live. I know there was a question about seeking care in Rochester. You may live in a place like Rochester. You may live in somewhere like Hutchinson, for instance. I worked in Hutchinson for 8 years. I was an anomaly in Hutchinson because there was just no Black provider. And there were a handful of Africans and African Americans there, but you have to be real in some communities where you find yourself that, okay, you got to seek care. So shoring up the emotions of the men in your life that need to get care, I think is crucial. And also disabusing their minds about therapy and medications. And it's not everything that it requires medication. It's not every patient that I see that I prescribe medications to. There are patients that I see that I tell them, you know what, you don't need medication. And they're still telling me that they want medication. So just letting them know that it's a process. The first thing is let somebody hear your story, and then we can go from there.
I had this question today from a client who wanted to talk to her male friend about getting some kind of help, and she was like, I don't know what to do. He won't listen. And so this question is right on time for that. And I said to her that perhaps having the conversation about, these are the things that are problematic, and then asking, what's working for you? Or how's that going for you? And if the question is, well, it's not really working, there's your in. Because if you're doing what you're doing and it's not working, let's talk about what might be helpful in that situation. So that's just a real, easy and brief way to say, you know what you're doing isn't working. You've got A, B, and C problems. It's not working. Let's talk about some solutions that might be more helpful.
I just want to say therapy for Black men, there are lots of resources on that website. I actually just did a quick scan, and there's like a tab and there's articles. So you don't have to go to therapy straight away, but at least reading things and to kind of ease that anxiety about seeking out mental health as a Black man, I think would be really helpful. So I think that's a website worth looking through.
Thank you all for sharing those resources and advice and how we can show up and be supportive for the Black men in our lives. I'm going to take one more question. This one is around for depression. So what about depression from being a stay-at-home parent? What can you do to stay mentally afloat?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Oh, so the question is, what about depression from being a stay-at-home parent, and how can they, what can they do to really stay mentally afloat?
Oh, okay.
I think going back to what Dr. Jan, said about just going back to that list of self-care. Literally, I think there's a lot of power in writing and journaling. Write out things that you like to do. Write out things that make you happy, that, brighten up your soul. I know with Dr. Osika saying that, the daylight hours are shorter, unfortunately, in Minnesota, but even just opening up a blind, putting on a podcast in the background, playing some soft music, eating, a good meal, figuring out a new recipe, I think is really helpful. I know with COVID and, the stay-at-home orders and, probably kids being at home. And I know I work with a few moms who are just extremely stressed and overwhelmed with distant learning. But just not to feel guilty about having a break, even if it's 30 minutes and just lock yourself in a bathroom and just breathe, or, having that time to yourself. Don't feel guilty about that. It's, I like the saying that, you have to fill yourself up completely. Whatever runs over is for your children or for other people. So it's really, really important to fill yourself up with things that, make you happy and brighten up your soul. But I do get and validate and hear that it's hard during these times of COVID. So.
One of my patients said something to me just yesterday about being home. And he said that he's realized that he's getting a lot of weight from being at home, and that he's doing a lot of snacking and comfort eating. And he says that his aha moment was when he realized that he cannot outwork his bad habit. And so he's realized that even though he is using his exercise machine and his cycling, that his eating habits are terrible. And so he's realized now that, okay, I have to cut out this cookies and candy. So it might just be as simple as the things that we eat, making sure that we are nourishing ourselves with something healthy, something nutritious, making sure that, like Dr. Adidoku said earlier on, you're journaling, you're exploring your own creativity, you're writing poetry, you're doing the things that you can do from home, you're exercising, maybe you pop in an exercise video that you're engaging with, you're joining online gyms, you're doing things that you're not by yourself, you're interacting, you're doing things, you can go places on your PC that you can explore. I mean, I've seen Galapagos, and I've seen places that I've never been to. You can explore and open up your mind to things that you're not really living in that space that you're kind of trapped in. Or you can go places and do things. And how do they make meals in Morocco? How do they cook a dinner in Turkey or something different that you can learn and do in your own space that would make you feel better about yourself. You're not just doing that monotonous thing all the time. You just try to break up the monotony and do something different. I think that will go a long way in helping somebody who is homebound and feels depressed because of their situation or because of the situation that we have all been locked into.
Well, thank you, Dr. Washika, and I think we'll end on that note. And thank you to Dr. Adidoku and Dr. Tyson Roberts. We all need to just take care of ourselves during this season. So I'm going to hand it over to Moriel, that's going to wrap us up.
So much, Karine. And actually, I have to apologize. We ran over our time, but they were such great questions that it just was hard to stop. And actually, we didn't get to all of the questions. So I do apologize to those of you who sent in questions and we weren't able to get to. But I saw the engagement in the chat. I saw the engagement from the panelists. Thank you, Dr. Tyson Roberts. Thank you, Dr. Awushika. Thank you, Dr. Adedokun. Thank you, Buki. This was her idea, and it was such a great idea. We all need this right now. And I just want to thank all of our attendees, our members, and our sponsors for coming out tonight and sharing as a community how we can keep our mental wealth growing positively. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, panelists.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Take care, everyone. Be well. Stay healthy.
Thank you all. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you very much.